Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. Why are we here? Not this video, of course, though you may be asking that question as well. To be honest, I ask that question on a fairly regular basis. But on this grand earth, when you think too much about it, like I have on many nights, it almost seems incredible that out of all the odds, we are here, existing. At the same time, we are rational beings who like to make sense of phenomena and questions that seem beyond our understanding. However, one of the most challenging questions that has ever faced mankind is why are we here? Ask people and you will receive a surprising variety of answers. From the nihilist who believes that we're just here to and die, to the astrologist who believes the stars have all aligned in our favor. One of the most common explanations for why we're here is the notion of a higher celestial being, or a god. For many people, it makes sense, either through philosophical explanation or personal experience. The notion of a god can be very beneficial for many people. However, it's not just an individual opinion. Although everyone, of course, has their own perception, typically an individual's belief in a higher celestial power will be made sense through the lens of religion. Religion allows people to categorize their core perceptions a bit more clearly and often provide elaboration as to what sort of behaviors may be desirable from the perspective of a god. This is typically content that will reach into our daily life, our diet, our relationships, our behavior. How we define ourselves is very important, and having religion as a moral foundation for behavior gives people much more clarity in what they believe. And in spite of its flaws, it does help many people define themselves. Many people who may be lacking purpose will find it in religion, and many may develop a keen enthusiasm for it, and will want people to see that they have seen it. They will want to spread the word. They will become missionaries of sorts. Now, back in the days of old, missionaries traveled all over the world to spread the word of religion and do their best to convert individuals who may be otherwise skeptical of what they preach. Some people still do that to this day.
And speaking of nuts, I have a nut here, okay? And this is a bolt, okay? So listen, this is what a normal person does, all right? See, I got the bolt right here, represent the male, right? We got the nut right here, represent the female, all right? This is what normal people do, okay? This is what, now let me show you what insanity says to do.
With mixed results, but others have felt the need to modernize the medium of how they spread their knowledge, and this has led us to YouTube. YouTube is the medium for influence. There are so many people who use YouTube for multiple purposes from all over the world, and you don't have to leave your room to post content there. It truly is revolutionary for communication. YouTube's user base is also pretty young, and given that young people are least likely to belong to religion, this leads to a target audience that is primed for conversion to whatever religion they choose. Now, at first it seemed that most religious content uploaded was just broadcasts of preachers providing their religious wisdom to their congregation. Because of the cultural variety within these preachers, this definitely led to some unique insight into what happens in certain churches.
Yes, Father. Is this heaven? Yes, Father. Is it heaven? Yes, Father. I have a woman here. Yes. What do you have to say about her?
It is quite wondrous, to be honest, but that's why we're here today, because eventually many creators popped up whose content wasn't just a broadcast but an actual direct creation, with the purpose of talking directly to you, the viewer, to tell you about the joys of religion. And as mentioned, there are many religions, but the one we will be focusing on today is one that I assume you guys are a bit more familiar with. Christianity. Christianity has been one of the culturally dominant religions in the Western world over observable history, for better and for worse. And because of its cultural dominance, it feels natural that it would be one of the most commonly represented on a fairly westernized platform. Though, mind you, looking at T-series, the internet is certainly expanding. For now, I assume most of the people who watch my channel are typically exposed to the same brand of religious creator that I am, and that brings us to Girl Defined. Girl Defined, or Girl Defined Ministries if you're feeling extra godly, is the Christian channel owned by sisters Bethany and Kristen. They are what I would brand as internet missionaries, providing a modern update to the age-old messages preached in the Bible. Now, they've been going for a good 5 years, and over that time they've put out a consistent stream of content which, although varying in their delivery, still focusing on the core message, that we should act in the way that God hath intended us to and avoid sinful behavior. They also have their own website where they publish various thoughts, they're selling their own books, and and they're even going on tour apparently, so they must really have a following. This seems fairly unexceptional to an extent. There are plenty of people who do this, and arguably there are many people who do it in a much more provocative fashion. In fact, on first glance, two white bread girls talking about how to behave in a Christian way seems like one of the most regular concepts for a channel. However, over the years, and in particular since around 2018, they have been the center of attention for multiple YouTubers who have made videos mocking or critiquing their content and the narratives that they promote through this. One video by prominent YouTuber comedian Cody Ko, in which he reacts to various girl-defined videos, has over 12 million views on it. That means 12 million people decide to tune in to watch someone react to this.
My guy obsession didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, gradual process to where it was the first thought, then the second thought, then making an effort to be near him, then doing this until eventually it became the most important thing in my life.
I mean, it's not quite endgame, is it? Nonetheless, since then, it's been collateral for creators to pile and to clown on these lasses. It is a savage, never-ending cycle with more dunking than a Michael Jordan game. Girl Defined have become one of the few creators, alongside the likes of Amblin, Reed, and Onision, where videos about them typically pull more views than their own videos. However, unlike these two, the reason is quite a different one, I believe. So, what did they do? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today my goal will be to analyze Girl Defined's content, work out their appeal, try to understand them in the cultural landscape, attempt to apprehend why they seem to occupy such a unique niche, and try to understand what the appeal is to comedians, commentators, and bullies alike. Jake Paul knows, to ascertain exactly how Girl Defined became one of YouTube's biggest targets. I suggest we get right in there. The first video up on Girl Defined's channel is a video in which they decide to ask various students at what appears to be a university campus of what a quote girl really is. The point that they were trying to prove through this video was that in the modern day, many people do not understand what really defines a girl. Their about page suggests that they are God-defined girls in a culture-defined world. God has the key to understanding what womanhood really is, and once you understand it too, you can be as complete as them. And as girls go, they seem pretty defined. I guess this video was to essentially set the premise of the sort of identity crisis that many of our younger generations appear to face. It's clear in the interviews that many people can't really answer the questions that Bethany and Kristen put forth so confidently. They clearly perceive this as a pressing issue that they want to resolve. They are defined girls, not like these formless blobs out there, and they are here to spread that definition to you. So how are they going to do that? Well, first let's begin to work out solutions. You have to discern the source of this identity crisis that we perceive. This is central to a lot of Girl Defined's videos, but for research purposes, I decided to watch them from the start. And the strangest thing happened. I started to agree with them.
When people wanted me, I felt like I was worth something. Yeah. When they didn't, I felt like my worth went down. And that is one of the biggest lies in the industry.
That's true.
And another thing I noticed is that behind the scenes, all those happy smiling faces, all of these perfect lives that we see on TV and on the posters really aren't there. So many of the girls I knew were really insecure. They were struggling with basing their worth and their identity on their looks as well. And in fact, we read a quote from a famous supermodel who actually said that in the modeling industry, the famous models that she knew were some of the most insecure women. So the truth is, what we see on the posters, what we see on the magazines, what we see on the TV isn't actually the true definition of womanhood.
Yeah, I'm not going to deny that.
It looks good, it smiles, it looks pretty, but it's actually counterfeit.
For example, self-worth in the beauty industry is a very real problem, and the fact that there was almost an anecdotal opening made it a lot more accessible, made the problem seem a lot more resonant as well. As a side note, I read their writing prompts, pretty good stuff. I might have to write a cheeky article for them one day.
Chapter 3 of our book, Girl Defined, we actually dive into what we call 3 pillars of counterfeit femininity.
Oh, cheeky plug. So anyhow, what is their solution?
Hey guys, it's Kristen and Bethany here with Girl Defined Ministries, and this is video number 2 in our series, 4 Secrets to Brave and Bold Womanhood. Video number 2 is called The Power of Embracing God-Defined Womanhood.
Ah, right, yeah, I forgot. It's a channel about God.
The second truth that we came across is that Christ defines our worth. As women, we, just like we shared in the last video, we are always searching for, okay, what gives me worth? What gives me value? What gives me identity? And the verse that we discovered that has given us a lot of hope is Psalm 139, 13 through 14. You may know it. It says, For God, you created my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
I mean, here you have these girls who arguably outlined a very relevant problem within our society, and their solution is God. On the surface, it doesn't really make much sense. But what they're actually trying to say, well, I think this one quote's quite interesting.
We live in a culture, like we talked about in the last video, that is totally obsessed with outward appearances. So we have our culture that portrays models and beautiful women as the ideal woman. But God's version of a successful and beautiful woman is actually totally opposite, totally countercultural to what we see out in the world. Proverbs 31:30 says, and you probably know this verse, that charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord, she is to be praised. And basically all that verse is saying is that it's not as important what's on the outside. The outward appearance is not the main thing.
It's fleeting.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna go away. What's on the inside is what really matters. God's saying a woman who fears the Lord, a woman who looks to my word and strives to honor me and live according to my standards, that is the woman that should be praised, not the woman who has the outward beauty.
Here I think they outline why religion is so meaningful to them, because in society, many people are fearful that their worth will be defined by the judgment of others. But basically, girl-defying create almost a logical tautology in a way, by making the statement that only Christ can define their worth. They are handing over a level of security to the viewer to view themselves in the eyes of Christ. Now the thing is, in their eyes, Christ or God is presented as the divine being, and in this instance, well, all forgiving, and therefore it takes the responsibility of judgment away from society and those around you and places it into the conception of a person who will judge you how you believe they will judge you, rather than being the subject to direct judgment that could obviously be problematic because no one can judge us perfectly as God.
He is our creator. He is the one who gives us worth. No one else can give us our worth because he didn't create us. They have no authority to give us our worth. Christ gives us our worth. And understanding that truth has given us a lot of hope.
Establishing the premise of God seems to be the basis of their content, which is also why they're so confident in the rhetoric they espouse. They see God as diametrically opposed to culture and thus present the argument of his existence as the solution to the societal ills that they perceive. The issue is that other skeptics and atheists will reject the assertion that God exists, and this then creates a disparity of discourse when people who are not accepting of the concept of God encounter their content. What happens is that in some videos, girl-defined explicitly present the notion of God existing as a premise. However, in others, they mostly mention it in passing, which makes their cultural commentary the perfect balance for people to react to. Digestible, yet kind of bizarre.
And they were like, what if we did something so radical? What if we waited until we were husband and wife to actually kiss for the first time? And it was a totally radical idea, but they decided to do it. So they ended up getting married and they saved their first kiss for their wedding day when they were husband and wife. And for some reason, that just really
I remember reading that
me.
story.
Whoa, restraint. Crazy one here, lads. Haha. The problem is, ultimately, many of us view religion as culture. Even if we are religious, we will likely accept that our perception is our perception. In the instance of Girl Defined, the rejection of religion as culture means that they often make arguments from the position of Christianity as truth, not as perception. Therefore, this often leads to arguments being made from the position of certainty rather than conditionality. Now, arguing that God exists is not inherently bad, but there is such a conviction to a lot of girl-defined social statements that so many people will find so inherently grey about how we should behave and how you can define things like identity. Therefore, girl-defined rhetoric often comes across as self-satisfied and conceited, and people love the feeling that they're talking back to a self-asserted authority. Now, make no mistake, it's important that people do feel confident in their identity, but Girl Defined reduced the number of identities possible or acceptable down to a few very basic ideas of what, in this instance, a girl should be. And this leads to statements that, when you remove the ideas of their basic philosophy, become very easy to mock. But you see, I've only really explained why their logic becomes somewhat funny. A logic that, in all fairness, many people have. There are many more details which make Girl Defined a little different to the rest of the bunch. Now we've presented and assessed the underlying mindset of Girl Defined and how that on principle would cause issues, we need to look at how they have really come to stand out from the crowd. Let's start with their presentation. Presentation is key to any creator who wants a long-term career on YouTube, and Girl Defined definitely have that. As said, generally, presentation is clear and legible. The aesthetic is nice and clean, and their videos have a clear structure. They are done in a way that would be quite regular for a YouTuber. However, the problem is, as shown by other videos, that whole environment is very saccharine, and they use such a repetitive structure, it becomes very forced. Go back a few years, and there was that brand of ukulele music that everyone abhors now, and justifiably so. To describe it, if stock ukulele tracks were a Christian YouTube channel, they'd be Girl Defined.
Hey, it's Bethany with Girl Defined Ministries.
What the fuck? Where is she filming this, in heaven?
Many people have picked up on this and have commented on how, in a way, the content seems catered to children. Now, in my opinion, they're not actually trying to sell the content to children. They're selling what they believe is the ideal image of pure femininity. This is how they idealize womanhood, that sort of virginal purity. And for some reason, a big proportion of internet comedy is cynically deconstructing that of which appears pure. Maybe it's just because of the contrast in tones, but Girl Defined's general tone tends to come across as lacking some self-awareness.
And now these shorts, I did a DIY hack, which I love. You just buy pants, you cut them, you wash and dry them, and then they get kind of frayed, and then you can literally have shorts any length you want.
And that's the thing. After watching enough of their videos, I wouldn't say they lack awareness. I'd say it's their agenda. Actually sounds worse, to be honest, but given their ideas of purity, it is completely in line with how they present the content. This is the sort of stuff that they are repulsed by, for example.
I've been struggling with porn for a while now, and I don't know what to do. I'm ashamed and scared of letting my secret out. I struggle with same-sex attraction to women. Lust is almost constantly invading my thoughts. My mind is a war zone. These are real and honest comments that the two of us have received from different Christian women. Each one of them has experienced some sort of sexual struggle and pain.
It's easy to goof on because of the assumptions they make in this lovely, wholesome environment. What is normal to many people is terrible to them, and their horror at the thought that plagues into comedic potential, because when we think of terrible things, we don't think of porn. They are extremely sensitive, and that is entertaining because it seems bizarre even if it makes complete sense to them because of their religion. As mentioned, if you want to guest post on their website, they drop clear and concise guidelines on how to. Unsurprisingly, these guest guidelines reflect how they present their videos. They really like telling stories, and on one hand, this makes their content easier to digest. They're not just throwing a barrage of Bible quotes at you. However, because the stories are actually quite interesting, it's easier to provide good comedic material out of them, particularly in how they use them often to justify various doctrines that seem a bit separated from the stories that they tell. It's the same reason that comedians love to tell stories. Different material in this instance. Most of the videos on them present them as these people who are so deeply indoctrinated with what they believe. And I think that's the great contrast that arguably provides the best content. They hold such deeply conservative views in many aspects, yet present them in such an innocent and pure way, despite it making absolute sense. For example, you wouldn't see Cody Ko make a video on the Westboro Baptist Church because in many ways they're extremely aggressive and unlikable. However, when the same sorts of views are presented like a cute bunny with a bow tie, it's fair game. Now, Girl Defined are not the Westboro Baptist Church. No, the point is aesthetics. These play into the contrast of the message and how easy it is to make content on it.
Because as culture changes, as time changes, the definition changes too. So how in the world do we know what is true, what is right when it comes to marriage? We as Christians can look in God's word and see from the beginning, like we talked about, God's constant truth, God's good plan for marriage.
So yeah, cultural progress, not allowed. Gotta do it like we did it 2,000 years ago, guys.
This contrast can be witnessed in other videos that have received a bitter attention, such as this Christian girl's morning routine.
And that is so powerful because the moment I step outside of my bedroom door, I'm going to be attacked with lies upon lies upon lies from the enemy, because we live in a world that is ruled by the father of lies. So it is crucial and it is essential that I get my armor of God on and I fill my heart with his truth.
Now, from what I've understood is that this girl is actually autistic and absolutely lovely. Equally, she's not really someone who uploads content on a regular basis or who's tried to actually create a brand, which is what Girl Defined have done. These points will represent something greater. Cultural accessibility, which is the real final nail in the coffin about how these girls become such easy targets. There are plenty of people who make fundamentalist statements, but most of them exist within environments that we do not fully understand. Therefore, we're hesitant to go after them because we don't want to be seen as punching down to a different culture in different context. With white bread Christian girls in a seemingly privileged scenario, it seems that there's basically nothing to punch down to. In many ways, they are perceived to represent the religious establishment. Equally, this is what makes their statements so amusing at some points. The seeming perception that they are fighting the culture. So why do all these responses get so many views? Well, it seems the reason that responses to Girl Defined's content is so popular is because the ideas they propose are so isolated from how people perceive them that people just can't get enough of videos telling them why they're wrong or just taking the mick. They're kind of funny, kind of awkward. It's not the sort of content that most people want to watch unironically. But once you see someone reacting or responding, it adds so much more value. The people just love to see anything about them. It is the pinnacle of transformative content. Girl Defined aren't really that controversial. Their views are a bit iffy for me, obviously, gay marriage and all that, but having dodgy takes because you're extreme religious is not the same as Onision or Amberlynn, who are just beyond saving in many ways. These girls seem pretty safe.
Was it worth it to save sex for marriage? What do y'all think?
I mean, absolutely.
And when these all factors came together, what really set them off was the classic domino effect. Once it became clear that the videos on this topic were well performing, plenty of people wanted in on the clownery, because there's no real risk in covering them for whatever audience you have. No one's really gonna come out in their droves to defend these two girls who, as nice and innocent as they seem, similarly love to present ideas that to many people are absolutely ridiculous, whether people genuinely think they deserve it or not. People can't really find a way to defend them because they neither say anything particularly insightful, nor do they seem particularly aggrieved in any way. And that's generally what we look for when we try to defend people. Is this the logic we should be using? Well, let's discuss it a bit further. The ultimate irony of what makes their content so easy to mock is that they promote such pure, sanitary behavior, which is given the green light through YouTube on the basis of social norms, many of which have carried through from older social norms, the ones that often seemed to present as radical and out there. Unlike the regularly demonetized LGBT content, which is presented by YouTube as so mainstream, it makes it easy to mock without the threat of demonetization or restriction, while simultaneously dealing out interesting cultural points of view. Girl Defined don't appear to monetize their videos, but it's quite clear that most of it would be fairly advertiser friendly. I mean, they arguably promote more conservative views than people who've been banned off Patreon, and they're on Patreon. I don't mind. I think a lot more content should be fair game for monetization, but it equally shows the weird cultural double standards that we may still adhere to. Through all of this, they ultimately become one of the easiest targets on YouTube, not just for comedy, but also for commentary. They're accessible, presentable, easy to watch, and in many ways the contrast between their very mainstream attitude to their sudden mentioning of God creates this sort of dystopian image of these friendly, happy girls talking to you about what God wants you to do. With the right music, I'm sure we can make that into something much more intense.
This topic, we just want to welcome you here. We want to invite you into this conversation and really join us as we dig into God's design, because we both have experienced embracing God's design, the freedom, the beauty, the life that it.
The point is, it can be equally comedic and unsettling, giving it a lot of creative potential for multiple creators. But do they really deserve it, or are they just under attack from a culture that just can't include them anymore? Are they really fighting their fight? The thing is that, in a way, given the direction of general human culture right now, in the Western world, particularly that which is represented on YouTube, waiting to kiss before marriage could certainly be seen as different. I mean, it's certainly not something that a majority of us do nowadays, but they seem to be confusing things we're not doing as things we're told we shouldn't be doing. This is where the general countercultural argument comes into play.
Not the thing anymore. Teen girls and young women are no longer taught in mainstream to save sex for marriage. We're taught now to have safe sex, to be safe and cautious in the way we go about it. But purity truly has become a thing of the past. And we are told by our culture that having sex before marriage, that's a good thing. Go for it. Just be safe about it. But that is a lie, and something we need to recognize as Christian girls, that is not God's best for us. That is not his perfect plan. Having sex before marriage
marriage is not a good thing.
The reason that certain behaviors were considered, quote, punk back in the day was not because most people didn't do it, it was because society specifically told them that it's something they shouldn't do. So doing all these dirty, grimy activities was a defiant cry against society. No society, as we currently know it, is going to condemn you for waiting until marriage to kiss. If a person's friend told them that they were going to do that, I'm sure most people would say something along the lines of, okay, nice, and carry on with their day. Not exactly the same reaction as telling someone you were gay 40 years ago, or even today in some scenarios. Girl-defined are not radical. They may be different, but they're existing without persecution. But alright, if you went into a girl-defined comment section, you could very easily say there is a bias against them speaking about these things. However, the whole idea of countercultural movements was that people shouldn't be telling others how to live, something that Girl-defined is basing their brand on. So it's debatable if on concept they can ever really frame their presentation of religion as countercultural. Now, we all have more discussions about what should be done. It's a core element to our platform. We can't all be miserable nihilists. But if I was to assert a moral position, I would also be completely opening myself up to criticism on that perspective too, especially if others did not feel it was moral either. Do I believe that girl-defined should receive stick for talking about that sort of lifestyle? Well, it depends. On principle, these things are a person's choice, and if that choice is more conservative, then that is fine. And if they want to talk about how it's helped them, then it would seem mean-spirited to take them down for that. At the same time, the core philosophy that they promote is also one that is restrictive, and not one that is a solution for everyone, and based on ideas that many people justifiably don't agree with, and have called out. Interestingly enough, many of the critical comments that I saw people referring to was the potential harm this sort of philosophy could do to children. And in many ways, I do completely see that. The rigidity of certain concepts is extremely hard on people who inherently don't fit into those molds, especially at the time when religion was very invested in the system. And that whole discourse should in a way be a discussion primarily for adults. And yet, weirdly enough, their content could very easily be seen as some of the most child-friendly content on YouTube at some points. That's because although we've modernized many points of view to be inclusive, we've also held on to some fairly traditional principles, for better and for worse. Don't get me wrong, sexual self-control is not a bad thing, as we've seen over the last few years. I mean, I never have sex, and it's definitely not because I'm alone and sad. I promise, it's just because I have restraints. But when it leads into topics that probably should be talked about with a bit more ease, many people tend to get uptight about it, large corporations included. At the start of this video, I spoke about missionaries and how they've constantly existed and called girl-defined internet missionaries. After watching enough videos by girl-defined, given how they often don't really try and justify God, I wouldn't say they're very traditional in their style. A lot of their content just comes across as catered primarily for Christians, even though they've said they want to reach out to other people.
Proverbs 31:30 says, and you probably know this verse, that charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord, she is to be praised.
However, because their content exists on a platform that can be accessed by anyone, and because they often try and talk about content from a social perspective, it can reach many people. It can be understood by many people, and it can be argued by many people. And for what it's worth, it is great arguing material. On surface value, the shock of the more basic points of view are great for comedy, and below the surface, their justifications for it are great for discussion. What they provide is still a relatively mainstream view in some communities. Therefore, people have no discomfort criticizing it. Yet on YouTube, because of the politics of the YouTube base tending to be rather anti-sex police, left-wing or right-wing, people also feel enjoyment of them being responded to without feeling that they're unfairly going after people, despite the fact that they're clearly outnumbered. Given the views are not completely off the table and do have moral implications, it is kind of justified if people want to respond.
I also feel like it's weirdly relevant to me because a lot of you guys may not know that I went to a very strict Catholic all-girls school for 6 or 7 years. There were some really fucked up people who worked there, and this channel reminds me a lot of the ideology that was fed to me at that school. Just, it's so familiar. It's so, like, I go to a dark place when people start talking about Jesus at me.
If you believe in God, it's fair enough. I'm not going to tell you what and what not to believe. But there is something so fascinating about the people so convinced of the belief they believe that you can dictate many people's behaviors, and it will just free their mind, even if they're seemingly rather inconsequential. The idea of a normal YouTuber who is also extremely Christian is embodied by the content of Girl Defined, which is what ultimately makes them so open to the ridicule and rebuttal that they often receive. We should all do our best to define ourselves. However, it is inevitable that many people will not find that definition in religion, and this is something that Girl Defined don't seem to quite grasp. Although, it's clear they've defined themselves. Girl Defined's content and responses to it may be overdone, but their ideas and videos are the sort of stuff we love seeing people clap back to, and they've marketed it in a way that makes it perfect for just that. So credit where credit's due, and hey, they even get free promotion. The Lord does indeed work in mysterious ways. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Felt good recording this one. Felt nice, felt good fun. It's good when you have a good feeling recording something and you're just in that energy. So thank you. I want to give a big shout out to my editors. They better have done a good job with this one because I was coming in with the energy today. It's fantastic. Big shout out to my Patreons, some of the beautiful people up there on screen now. Thank you so much, guys. You are fantastic. I have to give a special individual thanks to my $50 Patreons, Bo Wright, Jewel Angel 1, and Some Hullabaloo. Thank you so much. And the face of Team Rocket. Thank you so much, guys. I have to give another greater individual thanks to Adam Michael, Brandon Junk, Evening Steel. All of them have donated $100. That is unbelievable. Fantastic, guys. We've got that energy and give me life. I've been feeling a bit off in the last few days and I feel back on form now. We are back, baby, and we are ready to rumble. If you want to contact me, my Twitter's @TheRightOpinion. Facebook is there in the pinned comment. Click the read more. It's all there. It's all nicely presented. And I've also got my Discord too if you want to be a part of that. I don't really have too much else to add right now. Hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you in the next one.